Well, hello. Our guest today is Dr. Marian Billich, who's a very seasoned practitioner of EFT, OEFT, etc. And our topic is a really interesting one. It has to do with, since optimal EFT and the unseen therapists are so intimately involved with the spiritual dimension. The unseen therapist is a non-denominational for our spiritual dimension. A lot of people have some questions about that. Now, what's interesting is when people come to me, by the time they get to me, they know that the door they walk in is going to be a spiritually oriented door. I'm using the unseen therapist. That's what I do. And so by the time they come to me, they know that. Now, by the time they come to other therapists or start to use it for themselves or other things where they're maybe not so oriented, a lot of questions can arise, and how we handle them, what we do about them. Marian has a lot of good ideas about that. So let me bring her on now. Hold on. Say hello, Marian.
Hello, everybody.
Okay. Hi. So let's talk about this, Marian. You were talking about you've written to me some lengthy stuff about all this, and one of these had to do with a client who you used the term voodoo. I mean, she really thought that this experience might have something to do with voodoo because we're using the unseen therapist to come in and fix things and all of this, and she's even worried about could you do her harm? Talk about that a little bit, would you?
Well, yes, I'll start with how this came up. Recently, I was doing a webinar, one of your webinars, and we were talking about how you used conversational EFT to heal a pain in my ankle. And that what was so amazing is I didn't even realize you were doing it, so I couldn't say it was the placebo effect. The pain was gone, and it never came back. So she watched that webinar because that was one for the general public. And her reaction, instead of being excited, was frightened. She said it felt like voodoo to her. And the fear is, okay, he was using it for good, but what's to say that someone won't use it to hurt me? And she's terrified of that. And she said, I don't want to do anything having to do with the unseen therapist, at least now.
Yeah. Okay. So she says that. Now that's based on her beliefs and where she's coming from her point of view, that's a valid thing. Don't hurt me. I'm afraid of it. Mm-hmm. So what do you do about that? Do you just ignore it and go on and do something else and do tapping, or what do you do?
Well, I don't ignore it, but depends on the person. I am respectful of their desire, and I'll always say to them, we won't do anything that you don't want to do or that you're not comfortable with. But I will say that in my own inside, I always turn to the unseen therapist when I'm working with people. So at the beginning of a session or even before a session, I will ask her to come in. I'll ask her to help me, and I'll ask that I'll be a good vehicle through which her love can come through. And then I start the session with the person. I don't necessarily say anything to them because it's really about me and me opening up to that.
So to restate that, you're using unseen therapist not in a voodoo sense to fix her, but rather as a guide for you about where to go and what to say and what might the real issue be and this kind of thing.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yes. All right. Good. Did you do that with this particular client?
Yes. Yes, I do that all the time.
Do you recall the result?
There hasn't been that much time between the time that this happened, the webinar, and now. I don't see a huge change. However, she has talked a little bit more about the unseen therapist. She said she's going to read the book. So she is a little more open than she was before.
Let me just interject here. I've heard people say things like this, although not necessarily to me if they're coming to me, but I've heard this type of objection. And it really is couched more in the terms of, well, shouldn't you be asking permission to do this kind of thing? Mm-hmm. And of course, I get that a lot. And I've explained that many times. I will ask permission. as a courtesy, but not because I really think it's necessary. Because one of the things I've learned is that even if I tried to do something negative for somebody, with the unseen, it won't work.
Yes.
They just won't let it. We are all very, very powerful, and we're far more powerful than we think, and we can stop any healing we want. Okay. So, if they don't want to be healed or whatever, I can't. They can block it. I've seen that over. I've never, ever, ever seen a negative result from doing this. Have you?
No, not at all. And I can't imagine having to ask permission to just love someone, because that's all it is.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, you reminded me of an incident I had once on the Long Island Railroad. I've had a lot of very interesting experiences on the Long Island Railroad. And there was a man on the train who was extremely drunk, and he was annoying everyone around him. He was loud, he was crude, he was difficult. And he was sitting maybe 3 seats away from me. And what I did is I pretended I was reading a book, and instead I sent him love, just pure love from the unseen therapist. And at one point, he looked straight at me and he said, "Stop it." So clearly, he was aware of what I was doing, despite the fact I was trying to hide it, and didn't want it. So if someone doesn't want that love, it'll be rejected. It won't hurt them.
Yeah.
But he clearly did not want me to send him love.
Well, that also reminds me, getting back to the permission thing, and thank you for what you just mentioned. But if you think about, I'm talking to the listeners now for a moment. If you think about it, how your thoughts go during the day, there are times, I would suggest, that you're thinking about someone you sort of resent or don't like or whatever, and you will send them some pretty nasty stuff, even though you may not want to admit it, like "get off my planet," or, maybe even worse, who knows.
Mm-hmm.
And you do that, but you never ask permission for it. Okay. So why should you be asking permission to do a loving thing, which is what we're doing, and not ask permission at all to send them something really nasty? Okay. It's really, I just wonder if people really think that through a lot, so anyway, that's that point. You were also talking about someone who had a bad experience, I think, with a spiritualist or somebody who identified themselves. I mean,
yes. I'm not sure what that meant.
Yeah. Well, it was a bad experience with somebody else having to do with the spiritual thing, and they somehow think at that moment, well, okay, all spiritual efforts are bad, and I don't want to go there. Yeah. Did I say it right?
Yes. That's pretty much what she said. I don't ever want to do anything having to do with spirituality again.
Okay.
And she wouldn't even talk about what happened. She just, that's it. I'm not engaging in this.
So what did you do?
Same thing I always do. Inside, I still ask for the unseen therapist. Actually, with her, I did one other thing. I asked for the unseen therapist to be there for me, with me, that I be a vehicle through which her love would come into this woman's life. And I also asked that she soften whatever pain or wound this woman had experienced and gone through, so that she can be more open to the help. So that I was a little different with her.
Okay. All right. Well, there's another topic that I want to bring up on this same general idea, but I think my own view, if I were to get a client like this, I would be doing what you're doing, that I'd be asking for guidance anyway. I do that anyhow because I'm so used to doing this, and I've had so many conversations with unseen therapists that it's just part of what I do. But if they don't want it, the last thing I'm going to do is start saying, well, no, start debating with them about whether they should use it or not, because that's going to break rapport. That's going to do everything. So I would use tapping with them, although I haven't done that since, how long has it been now? It's been 7 years. But I could use tapping. I could even use conventional talk therapy if that's what they think they wanted. But I would just be simply guiding the discussion to a specific event they were having or they've had in the past, and then I'd be talking about it. I just bring in a therapist, and we're doing it anyway, and they can get some results in this conversational EFT manner. Now, let me shift to one other thing, Marion. You had one client, I'm reading this here. He insisted, God won't help me. I am not worthy of God's help. And that's because he had participated in something a long time ago that God wouldn't like. And therefore, he felt he was unworthy forever or something. So talk about that one, could you?
Yeah, that was a rough one, because when someone truly believes what they did was unforgivable, of course they're not going to believe that divine love is there for them. So what I did with him that I think helped is I talked about his son. And I asked him, if your son did something like you did, something that you thought was horrific, would you still love him? He said, of course I would. I said, would you forgive him? He said, of course I would.
Beautiful reframe. Thank you. Okay. But go ahead, please.
Well, and then the next thing I said is, well, do you expect God to be any less forgiving and loving than you are?
Yeah.
And of course, no. So that was a little crack in his thinking. It wasn't like that was an aha moment and after that he was cured. But that was a little crack in his thinking, which allowed us to start doing some work with bringing the unseen therapist in on forgiving him.
Beautiful. That reminds me of something. It's a question that I will sometimes ask a client, somebody I was starting off with. And they might have some question about the spiritual dimension, even though I don't get that very much. But I would say something to them like, if they're showing me any kind of doubt, I'd say, well, okay, if God, or whatever you call God, higher power, unseen therapist, whatever, was sitting right next to you, and I'm visiting with him on Zoom or Skype or something like this. If God were sitting right next to you, could God fix it? Now, they don't usually get asked that question, okay? And they'll often hesitate, and they'll almost always say, well, yes. And what I'm testing is what is their belief in there. Now, if I've got an atheist or something like that, I'm going to get a different answer, but I just tend not to get those, but they will say yes. Now, that's a reframing question in and of itself, okay, because we're starting to get into something, because we're going to bring in God in the name of unseen therapist or whatever they want to call it. All right. Could God fix it? Yes. I sometimes get the response similar to what you were just talking about, I don't deserve it. But they would say something like, well, just that. Yeah, but I'm not sure I deserve it. Or, but what I want to get across with this conversation is this issue too big for God? And of course it isn't. Okay, is it too big? I've got this disease and that disease and these pains, and I'm stage 4 on that and whatever. Could God fix it? Well, yeah. Okay. Then my question would be, well, why hasn't he? And then they never been asked this before. So this all gets into a reframing area. And well, why hasn't he fixed it before? Now that opens the door for me to say, we are a lot more powerful than we even remotely give ourselves credit for. We think we are limited to being within this fleshy, container called a body. But I don't think, and I'm starting to sow seeds at this point, more reframing seeds. I wonder if it's really that if God isn't fixing it, it's not because God can't fix it. It's because we aren't listening we aren't willing to go along. We want to hold on to what's causing it, some resentment, some anger, some guilt. We don't want to let these things go. And as long as we don't want to let them go, guess what?
Yes.
The cause still stays there. It's a beautiful place to go in and start reframing and loosening up some stuff so that their belief starts shifting from I'm doomed to, oh, there's a possibility. Big deal. That's a big deal. It's a big reframe. Anyway, Marianne, that's you and I talking a lot about this stuff. Anything more you want to say?
On this topic, no, but I just wanted to tell you that your question, could God fix this? I remember hearing in a webinar, and I loved that question. I've used it for myself when I felt it was hopeless. I couldn't get over something. I've used it with people I'm working with, and it's just a wonderful question to ask because, of course, God could fix it. So it must be me or whoever I'm working with who's stopping that healing. And then the question, like you said, is, all right, how come? Now, you talked about things like resentments, and but I also think fear should be added to the mix. Fear of getting better.
Sure.
Just having an experience of instantaneous healing, which could happen, and I had that happen to me once, is terrifying to some people. It was to me. It was so terrifying that I said, I don't ever want this to happen to me again. And I regret that I ever said that. But the fear can be, stop it.
Well, yeah, but let me talk about that for a moment, because people don't think about this for a moment. But here I am. I'm having these diseases and I'm having these ailments and whatever. And my belief system is they can't be fixed like that. Okay. Or they can't be fixed, period. Okay. Maybe God could fix it, but we haven't asked that question yet. Okay. But they're there. And then when we do get one of our 1 minute wonders and they do occur, okay, usually it takes more time. But when we get a 1 minute wonder, that can be very unsettling because it violates what you truly believe to be true. You are stuck with this thing, and if you're ever going to get over it, it's going to take weeks, months, years, or decades, okay? If ever, to do it, and all of a sudden, that's frightening. That we are, I think, I'd like to get your view. I think what we're afraid of there is our own power.
Yeah.
Now, one would think, why would I be afraid to be Superman, for example? Why would I be afraid to do that? I mean, just to use a catchphrase, okay? But literally, there is a fear. I recognize it. I've seen it in my own spiritual experience, and others, and there's this fear of our own power. We are so much more powerful, and we're afraid of it.
Yes.
Interesting concept.
And if I had the answers to that, I'd be thrilled to share them with you.
Yes. Well, when I have it, I'll share it with you, and maybe together we'll share it with the world. How's that?
Okay.
Okay. All right, Marianne, thank you so much for your wisdom. It's been very helpful. And to those listening in, we'll see you next time.
Okay.